This week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry with agriculture broadcasters Orion Samuelson and Max Armstrong, and featuring agriculture meteorologist Greg Solier. This week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Case IH and your local Case IH dealer. Coming up on this weekend's broadcast, our effort to keep you safe online and on rural country roads. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the broadcast. Mr. Pearson is alongside me here as we'll, in tandem, cover the story of agriculture this weekend.
Indeed we will, Max. And one of the stories we should cover this time of year in particular is the dangers on rural roads. It can be tough when that corn is growing and they plant it awful close to those roadsides to see around that corner.
I hate to make this prediction, but I really believe somewhere over the next few weeks in the heart of the country there'll be a terrible accident at a rural intersection because it's partly obscured by the corn. It's a simple fact of life this time of the year. Stop signs may not be there. They may have been knocked down by a rural mowing crew. There are some intersections that never did have a sign simply because of the economics in rural areas. So use extra caution. Don't take anything for granted when you're coming up to an intersection.
That's right.
And there's tall corn.
Even if there's no stop sign, slow down.
We were out of the rural areas this week. Northern Indiana checking on the corn crop as we visited with Zach Schrock. He's on the farm at Bremen, Indiana.
Start was pretty decent. A little warmer than normal. Usually mornings start off with a thick sweatshirt on and comes off about noon, but most of the mornings you could be out in a t-shirt and it was fairly comfortable. So little odd for that time of year to be that warm in the early mornings, and it held the heat all the way through the nighttime too. So that was a little interesting. As far as throughout the season, it's just kind of weird sporadic weather. There hasn't really been any patterns. We've had pretty decent rains up until about a month ago. Kind of shut off a little bit. We got some here recently. That helped a lot, but now we're getting hot and dry again. So
Some folks have worried that it hasn't cooled off enough overnight, that's when you really lose some yield.
So early in the season, like I was talking about, it was staying warm through the nights. Now, here in the past week or so, it's been cooling off a lot during the nights here. So that's been really helpful. But early on, it was not doing that. So that's kind of what I said. It was really odd that it was staying really warm through the nights around here.
You're right on the cusp of pollination for much of your corn, aren't you? And at this stage, you could probably use a little rain. What's your assessment?
We're definitely getting dry again. That last batch we got was just enough to satisfy it. But yeah, it's getting thirsty again.
What do you think at this stage? I know there's a lot that could happen yet. It's never in the bin till it's in the bin.
You got that right.
How does your yield potential look?
Right now, I would say we're looking better than normal. So that's always promising. But our irrigated stuff, we can get that pretty much how we need it. I mean, that's why it's got irrigation on it. So that stuff is right on track for where it should be. Dry land stuff is looking decent, but like I said, it's going to need some water here soon. So.
What do you think your yield potential could be on corn, ideally?
So on all of our irrigated stuff, we're definitely going to be up close to that 400 bushel range. Our higher production dry land will definitely be in those 220s. Lower production stuff, we'll still be around 180, 200. So as of right now.
You did hear correctly. Zach said 400 bushels of corn there that they think they'll have on that farm in northern Indiana.
This portion of This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Firestone Ag. The Firestone Ag Dealer Network offers you the support, inventory, and resources you need. Visit firestoneag.com to find your local certified dealer. And now it's time to dig into these commodity markets, which were quite volatile over the past week. We had USDA release their World Agricultural Supply and Demand estimates, and we saw an update on inflation. All of that moved the markets. Joining us this week to talk about it is Garrett Toy of Ag Trader Talk. And Garrett, we were greeted first this week with the World Agricultural Supply and Demand, WASDE reports. What did USDA update?
It was basically a very ho-hum report. We were looking for an increase in corn carryout. We were looking for a cut in exports. We got it in feed residual from the carry-through from the June stocks report. So we had a 25 million bushel increase in old crop corn carryout, which is to be expected. But since the market is expecting exports to be cut, we're probably going to see another cut in the August WASDE. But we're also going to have new crop yield estimates at that time as well. So the fact of the matter is the last two reports we've seen growing corn carryouts in the U.S. Despite the war and Russian invasion. So the corn carryout is suggesting that we may be rationing at these higher prices, feed and residual, exports on the heels of the larger South American crop and their values, which are probably going to undermine U.S. export programs into the early new crop through our harvest. The bean report, a bit of a surprise. I think the USDA kind of admitted, throughout the year, crush has always kind of been behind the pace, but we were getting closer to the USDA's target every month. And I think the USDA they cut crush by 10 million bushel. And I think they basically just admitted we're running out of time to hit that target. It was a minor cut. So we did cut bean carryouts, and new crop carryouts were cut because of the lower acres from the June. So the fact of the matter is, you look at the new crop carryouts versus where we're at on old crop carryouts, we're essentially the same. And they're still forecasting a 177 yield in corn and a 51.4 bushel acre yield in soybeans, which basically says that we have very little, yield risk here, and unless we're going to have or we could have a very tight situation again next year. But that being said, on the world beans situation, they did cut Chinese soybean imports again, and they're continuing to struggle with COVID and their hog herd, and that's undermining the general soy complex at this point.
Was that a surprise to see that the Chinese import dropped?
Not really. The data has been fairly hit and miss. I mean, we've had COVID lockdowns, but now we've got soaring pork prices, which is counterintuitive that, pork margins are bad. But our sources there are saying that, restaurant demand is down. The individual states in China are trying to offer coupons to encourage, eating at restaurants and things of that sort. So I think there's a little bit of a demand problem there, but we were expecting to see fourth quarter that demand start to improve here a little bit. But the fact of the matter is, with the export numbers that we got this week, China's going to have to hit 21 million metric ton in the fourth quarter of their marketing year to hit that 90 million metric ton USDA estimate, which would be the smallest imports for the fourth quarter since 2013.
So it seems doable.
It seems absolutely doable.
Ethanol demand, did we see any adjustments from the USDA on ethanol?
None whatsoever. And we may have peaked on ethanol demand, whether it's difference of corn availability or whatnot, considering some of the basis is paid out here. But we're also starting to see some of the seasonal declines. When we get into July and August, they start to see those seasonal downtimes once we get into new crop corn.
All right. And we'll be back talking more markets with Garrett Toy of Ag Trader Talk. This portion of This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Firestone Ag. Harvey Firestone invented the first pneumatic farm tire, forever changing what it means to farm hard. Visit firestoneag.com to learn more about this history and tire solutions for today. We're back talking markets with Garrett Toy of Ag Trader Talk. And Garrett, it wasn't only the WASDE that was moving the markets this week. It was the inflation update. 9.1% inflation, fastest since 1981. That's changing the way money moves around in the global financial markets, isn't it? It
is, but I should point out that a lot of these inflation numbers are backward looking, and what we're trying to differentiate is what's the true inflation number, and what is, whether it's actually higher than 9.1%, and the fact of the matter that commodities have sold off here in the last 4 to 6 weeks. So the fact of the matter is that you have to realize that there's more than just commodities, and the fact that we're in the commodity business, it's what we notice, that the commodities have sold off. But there's other things that are involved in that basket. It's in fact, you've gasoline, it's used car sales, new car sales, purchasing, whatever the consumer purchases are included, not just commodities. So, in fact, I think the only thing that really declined in that CPI number was lodging away from home. So is that telling us, that's hotel usage?
Yeah.
So are people not traveling as much? Is that a sign of the economy starting to slow a little bit? But the fact of the matter is I think that in the last 4 to 6 weeks, there's been a sentiment change. These early adapters or the early fund buyers in the market have decided that, the market's peaked. We want out before the recession comes, especially in the face of rising interest rates. And then we've had the dollar trade to new highs. And I think, the reason that the dollar has traded to new highs is that the U.S. has been, everyone has inflation, But the U.S. has been leading the charge as far as the interest rate hikes, and we're looking at a 3/4 or even chatter this week of a 1 basis point interest rate increase, and then you had the Bank of Canada come out this week with a 1% basis interest rate hike as well. So maybe the rest of the world is going to catch up to these interest rate hikes, which may potentially present some weakness to the dollar, which this dollar rally has kind of been counterintuitive to what we have expected. So. Yes, I think the money's kind of coming out. It's going to be very difficult for that money to come back in.
Okay.
However, this kind of sell-off is healthy for the market because of the transfer of ownership from the managed money long to the commercial and the end user. And obviously, the interesting thing is despite the flat price break, we've seen spreads firm in corn, soybeans, meats, and even crude, which doesn't necessarily, we may be getting ahead of ourselves as far as when this recession is going to hit, but people want to kind of get out of the way of it in the meantime. I kind of thought we'd see it in the fourth quarter of this year. There seems to be more people that are thinking it's going to be first quarter, second quarter of 2023. So there's a lot of ebbs and flows that are going to take place here in the next 6 to 12 months.
A lot of uncertainty is being built in. But Garrett, I have seen the cattle market this past week hold up exceptionally well given the volatility. Is there additional strength left in that market?
That's a $64,000 question, because I think it's if you're going to have a market that's going to show a reaction to a recession, it's going to be the meats, right? So I think you're caught between the friendliness overall of the fat cattle market. The only thing that's going to hurt that is recession. However, people are getting a reprieve at the pump with these lower gas prices. Where gasoline's down about 7% on average on retail prices in the last 2 to 3 weeks. So if they weren't going to go buy that steak on Saturday night because gas prices were over $5, maybe they are going to spend that money here near term.
Do you think producers, cattle feeders need to be marketing those spring cattle today, given where market's at?
I think they need to look at it. I mean, with their 150 to 155 levels in those spring markets, they're pretty decent values, especially when we've been all throughout this year where 144 trade in the north. I mean, if we had those prices this year, we'd absolutely take it. And with the threat of recession coming, I think that it's something to seriously look at.
Might be prudent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Garrett Toy, Ag Trader Talk, thanks for joining us this week.
Thanks for having me.
Chad Colby's look at agriculture technology comes your way next, brought to you by the IBM Watson Decision Platform, combining AI with Internet of Things data to help agribusiness increase yields, improve quality, and drive sustainability.
So you're in a rural area. You don't have to worry about internet safety, do you? There's nobody coming after you out on your farm?
Maybe not the case, Max Armstrong.
Chad Colby has some rules to stay safe on the internet. Here's his report this weekend.
If you've followed our tech segments over the years, we're quick to talk about the latest phone, the latest tablet, or even computer system. But on this week's tech segment, we're going to talk about a very serious topic that, quite honestly, we haven't talked about here on the show. And that is the security that you should have on these devices to keep your data and your information protected from the bad guys, if you would. So I'm going to offer you my top 10 suggestions on things you can do to make your equipment more secure. The first is make sure all your equipment has the current software on it. Often, these manufacturers have enhancements to the devices. Make sure they're current and make sure your apps are always current, especially those apps that have to do with your credit cards, your bank accounts, those type of things. Never save any of your login information or payment information on the phone. And what I mean by that is you don't have a Word document on your computer with all your passwords on it. You want to save that somewhere else secure. Make sure, and this is a must, I see a lot of people that do not do this. All of these devices should have a password on them to even access the device itself. I know that can be a little difficult in some of the environments that we work in, but a password there is huge, especially if you think about it. If you might leave one of these devices behind, you don't want somebody to have access to all your information. Be sure to use a strong password. A lot of people today are suggesting using passwords that are the first letter of a phrase. And when available, always use two-step verification. If you get asked to do that, click yes and go through that process. If you're not familiar with two-step verification, you might log into an app or a website and they would need to text you a code You put the code in to verify that it's you. Make sure you download applications from a secure source. Always still consider using antivirus software. I use it on my equipment, regardless whether that's Mac or Windows. Again, it just adds another layer of protection. Always back up your data. You can see here on my desk, I've got some external hard drives that I use. I also utilize the cloud as well. If you haven't done that, the costs on that are relatively low now compared to just a few years ago. These last few are some really good suggestions. One of them I'd never even considered. I want to thank my nephew Colin, who just graduated from cybersecurity. He actually got a degree in cybersecurity, and he's got a really big one. I'll save for the last one. But a couple that really got my attention is never use public Wi-Fi. I don't use that myself. I really never have. And the reason why is there's very little security on public Wi-Fi. The other one is, and I always did it just because of battery life, but be sure to turn off your Bluetooth and Wi-Fi if you're not using it. Again, it's just closing that door for someone who might want to do mischief on your account. And the big thing on the end is this, number 10. If you make payments for anything, or you log into your credit card, you log into Amazon, or any place that you're exchanging money, be sure to log out of that app and log out of that website. And that's something I really never considered in the past, but that was one thing that Colin's suggestion. You want to close that door to make sure there's nobody watching that can run in after you and do some mischief. Again, these are just some great suggestions, things that we kind of take for granted with this technology. I'm sure there's more than that, but do your homework and have a plan to keep your devices as secure as possible. For This Week in Agribusiness, I'm Chad Colby.
So, down over that list, on which one of those are you a violator? Where are you putting yourself in jeopardy? You know, I'm on public Wi-Fi sometimes. Well, at least on airplanes. That's probably the only place, but I shouldn't do that, Chad would
No,
say.
you shouldn't. It's tough when you're traveling. You know, I realize I'm guilty of leaving myself logged into websites. I do that constantly. Yeah. I probably shouldn't have just mentioned that on television.
Where's your laptop, pal?
Well, folks, stick around. We will have more This Week in Agribusiness coming up. Farm Progress, only about a month away. Welcome back to This Week in Agribusiness. You know, summertime is here, Max. It's a time of festivity. Farmers coming together, gathering with other members of their community, and talking technology in some cases, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. The Wisconsin Farm Technology Days were held this week, and it draws from across the country, I guess, in some instances. That was the case for our farm broadcaster friend, Susan Littlefield, who hails from eastern Nebraska. Let's see, she went from eastern Nebraska to central Wisconsin, where that show was held, I believe, at Loyal, Wisconsin this week. How was the crowd, Susan?
I'll tell you, Max, the crowds were amazing. Thanks for inviting me to be on the show with you guys this week. 3 days of shows that were absolutely packed with folks checking out some of the latest technology. And the fact that we are on a dairy farm that milks about 250 cows, what makes them unique is they have robots doing the milking. So there's no more need to get up at 5 a.m. and run back to the barn at 5 p.m. The cows pick the time that they want to be milked. So technology definitely is making it fun on this dairy farm.
Yeah, and it tracks a lot of data on those cows as well. It's really fascinating to watch the automated milking equipment. One thing that occurs to me about that particular farm show, it moves from one farm to another around the state of Wisconsin, very subject to weather challenges. But the weather was pretty much ideal this week, wasn't it?
It was. You know, if we got rain, it happened at night when nobody was on the show ground. So the rain that came in, we got a half an inch one night, really helped to knock the dust down for folks that are walking around. So as I'm talking to you guys, I'm literally sitting in the middle of an alfalfa field, which they have turned into tent city. And we've got streets, we've got folks walking around, we've got golf carts going, and a neat opportunity. And those rains definitely have helped to keep everything in control.
Well, Susan, it wasn't just technology in production, it was also technology in safety under discussion there at Farm Technology Days. I understand you had the chance to participate in a grain rescue. You were buried. Susan, what was that like?
Well, it was interesting because obviously the fact anytime that we, and when I say we, being a firefighter and an EMT and also a farm broadcaster, can train farmers about being safe in their operations, it's always a win-win. And they took the opportunity to bring in a grain cart, and they are literally bearing mid-thigh folks in it that are harnessed in to talk about what it's like to be buried in grain. And so for me, when I climbed in there, I was standing on top of the corn, had no problems at all. The minute they started letting the grain out of that wagon, I was sucked in. It took less than 3 seconds for that grain to move and for me to be pulled in. And at one point, I could not move. My knees couldn't move. My toes were actually starting to tingle. And so I was doing play-by-play for those farmers that were standing around watching, explaining what was happening and what the pressure felt like. And I explained to them, if this had been December, January, that corn was going to be cold and hypothermia could quickly set in as well as you're entrapped in that grain bin.
Wow, I've been told it feels like an anaconda, just slowly squeezing you tighter and tighter. Susan, was that your experience?
Very much so. The pressure that happens, it feels like you're being shrink wrapped in corn. You cannot claw your way out. Everybody thinks, oh, it's corn, I should be able to pull myself out. But as that corn starts to pull your body more and more in, it continues to get tighter and tighter around you. So if you can imagine taking a rubber band and wrapping it around your finger numerous times and you feel that pressure, that's the same type of pressure that you feel inside the grain. And that's why it's always so vitally important that our farmers tell somebody where they're at all times. And if they have to go in that grain bin, make sure that they're harnessed in, because if they're walking across a crust that has an air pocket below, they're going to break through and go in. And as one of the firefighters said, if you end up at that auger, there is absolutely nothing we can do to try to save you. So it's a good point to remember.
Around you, the area where you serve as a volunteer firefighter in Nebraska, does every fire department have one of those rescue tubes? They're a little bit pricey, I think, for some of the rural volunteer departments.
Yeah, Max, they are. And most of the departments are working towards getting them if they've received them in a grant opportunity or they've just saved money and fundraised for them. I know our department has one, and there's a few others within our fire district that have them as well. But everybody knows who has those bin rescue units available. And as we always joke, it's great that we see dust on the bag and that we clean it off just to do training, because we like to keep it in the back of our barns, because that means our farmers are being very safe in the bins. But at the same time, this opportunity, like for this training that we saw happening here in that demonstration, they brought up the fact that a bin rescue unit costs a minimum, and that's a minimum of $3,000. And for most small rural departments, that's not pocket change, and they've got to try to figure out a way to fundraise for it. So they were encouraging farmers that were in attendance to find ways to help their local departments receive the bin, because a life that could save might be their own.
That could be a lot of pancakes sold at a pancake breakfast. You mentioned training a couple of times. In the final few seconds here, how important is training for rural volunteers? And I know that burden is getting to be heavier for many.
It is vitally important. Anytime that we can get our hands on the equipment, it just becomes second nature. It's like a ball player. That catcher knows when and how to move to catch the ball without even thinking about it. And that's, we as firefighters and EMTs, we want to be the same way. We want it to be second nature, that our minds are obviously thinking about what's happening, but our hands and our body knows what automatically to do. And that includes folks running to the truck to get the equipment that we might need and thinking ahead 3 and 4 steps, so we're set to go when we need the equipment.
Thank you for your service there in eastern Nebraska, not only as a volunteer firefighter, but the great service you provide as a farm broadcaster. We appreciate it, Susan.
Thank you, and thanks for having me on the show this week.
Susan Littlefield, KRVN, the Rural Radio Network there in Nebraska, a great farm broadcaster friend of ours. There's more coming up on This Week in Agribusiness.
This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry, is brought to you by Case IH.
Welcome back to This Week in Agribusiness. Each week on this show, we like to highlight the future leaders in agriculture, that next generation of agriculturalists, and we're not the only ones. Barchart is also interested in the next generation, and they just compiled a survey looking at the future of agriculture. Joining me now is Mark Haraberta, the CEO of Barchart. And Mark, tell our audience first about Barchart if they're not familiar.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. So Barchart, we've been in the commodity business from a data and technology standpoint really since the mid-90s. We were one of the first websites online bringing commodity data really to the world. And we have a division that focuses on commodity solutions for agribusiness, really to help the supply chain in purchasing commodities, managing risk around commodities, hedging commodities. And those solutions extend down to producers. Things like mobile technology to keep them informed, to buy and sell grain between agribusinesses and farmers.
Absolutely. And of course, you've got to have that next generation coming online to stay in business, to look at that future. Why was it you compiled the Future of Ag survey?
Yeah, so, no doubt there's a lot of technology changes and new technologies coming into agriculture. There has been for the past, there always has been. The speed of change has certainly accelerated. You look at things like data collection, everything from on the farm to the products that these agribusinesses may be using for hedging. So data's become a big one. Satellite imagery, weather, farm management, that's a big impact on that side. But that technology, it extends to seeds, it extends to equipment, and it extends to the solutions we provide for agribusinesses to communicate with farmers, to conduct businesses with farmers, and to hopefully be more profitable.
Yeah, that's certainly the goal, isn't it? And so you talked to college students for this survey. Mark, tell us the scope. How many students and how many different colleges did you address?
Yeah, so it was important for us to hear from that next set of leaders that are coming into the space. They have most of them had a very in-depth agricultural background, coming from a farming background or a rural area. So there was a lot of passion for agriculture from this group. We interviewed over 100 students from 18 different universities, University of Iowa, Illinois, Nebraska, Purdue. So those with big ag programs. And these students, they're studying agronomy, they're studying ag econ.
Yeah. And what challenges did they highlight as driving some concerns for the future?
Yeah. So, it's easy to say technology is impacting agriculture, but you got to drill deeper into that. I was kind of alluding to that a little bit ago. What exactly are you talking about? Are you talking about, drones in the field? Are you talking about sensors measuring weather very locally? Are you talking about software? One thing I always like to highlight is the mobile phone. For me, for our clients, that is a major, call it farming tool.
Yeah.
To access market information. Today, farmers could pull up their phone and actually use our technology to sell grain to their local elevator.
Absolutely.
Or pull up their scale tickets. In the past, that process has been in person.
Yeah.
It's been over the phone and other older technologies. So bringing mobile devices and really having that mobile network available from a cellular standpoint has been very important to bring it forward.
It changes the game, that's for sure. Mark Haraberta, CEO of BarChart, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Greg Solier now brings us his farm weather forecast for the week ahead, presented by Pivot BioProven 40. Predictable, productive, weatherproof. Turn to a better nitrogen. Turn to Pivot BioProven 40. Learn more at pivotbio.com. Many of you have questions about the weather of the weeks just ahead, especially about that forecast heat. What about that dome, Greg? Will there be a dome of heat continuing over the midsection?
No, there always is in the month of July. It's just its strength, its movement, its retrogression sometimes. Fancy word back to the west. Its movement to the east and those ridge-riding thunderstorms. They're back in the forecast. I know we're in a hole across the heartland regarding soil moisture, but it's not a completely dry setup. It is by and large the Pacific Northwest, where areas from the Cascades to the east have been subject. Last week, triple-digit readings into Washington State. For now, the heat, 105 degrees plus into the Black Hills and points on southward. Maybe we bust the atmospheric cap and get a lone thunderstorm. Otherwise, some moisture for the Canadian Prairie. Next frontal system with some cooler air confined again to the Cascades, Northern Rockies, and westward. That frontal boundary on the move. And again, sparks maybe a stray shower. It's a largely dry setup, except for maybe the coastal areas this week. The heat across the interior sections of the northern part of the Great Basin, triple-digit stuff will kind of retrograde slightly back into areas of the central Rockies, still hot enough into the Canadian Prairie, and a couple of hit-and-miss thunderstorms. You know, if you get those thunderstorms to tap into this jet stream pattern, they are capable of generating hail and high winds. Southwestern part of the country, the monsoon has kind of wound up last week, wound down for this week. All depends on where we put the hot dome, and it is mighty tough on man and beast all the way into some of the burned out just about whatever you're trying to grow through Oklahoma and Texas western areas, where we might, mind you, generate 1 or 2 lone thunderstorms. Lower desert as well, triple-digit readings back into many valleys of California. As far north as the Sacramento Valley last week, 110. Some of that stuff could very well play back in. And looky here, this will be probably the third named system out of the eastern Pacific. It may actually draw some moisture northward into the desert southwest, really accentuating maybe some monsoonal moisture here. The triple-digit stuff, Max, is back into Nebraska, Kansas on southward, 105, 110, feeling like 115 degrees out there.
So at least in the week ahead, no relief in that plains area.
That's right. It's like 75, 85% of whatever you're trying to grow in Texas is pretty much burned on out. And the triple-digit stuff as far north as the Black Hills early in the week. But the jet stream, the nose of the jet here, and these frontal boundaries are kind of hung up together. They're married together. And it's in this corridor where we do anticipate at times some degree of meaningful rainfall. We need it here especially, and into the western Corn Belt too. But in the meantime, it's laid out for now. Out north of the Corn Palace into the upper Midwest, western Great Lakes region, this frontal boundary will slide southward. The heat and humidity along it, maybe 1 or 2 of these thunderstorms. But again, you get under the nose of the jet. Some of these rains come at a price. Hail, high wind, blowdown, lodging, and all that stuff. The heat will kind of retrograde for now back into the central and southern Rockies. Cooler, drier air, a delight into the upper Midwest, northern Corn Belt locales. Just mighty tough on man and beast and whatever you're trying to do from Kansas on southward into West Texas cotton. A little more humidity, maybe a couple of thunderstorms out of New Mexico, Old Mexico, and northward from there. A little weak upper tropical system here may accentuate some of the rains early in the week across the Delta, and another feed of tropical moisture into Baja with that system in the Pacific. That's the story there. The heat all the way back through Kansas into the western Gulf and back west through Texas, Max. Another tough one here this week out of the southern plains.
The eastern part of the country, any sign of any tropical activity?
No, very quiet Atlantic basin. We think there's a little too much dust coming off the Saharan continent here, blowing across the Atlantic. That suppresses tropical development for now. In the meantime, pretty quiet for the northeast of New England. Note this cold front and low and showers and thunderstorms on the move, and pretty good coverages as well as the week wears on. Just enough to keep us going over the heart of the Corn Belt for the end portion of the week. The heat will move into the northeast of New England. Some tropical downpours through the Delta region early to middle part of the week. The hot weather through Texas and Oklahoma, western Gulf Coast. Otherwise, scattered afternoon showers and thunderstorms from Florida into the Carolinas. We'll take more moisture here. 105 or better from about the Delta on westward late in the week.
Greg Solier is back with his extended farm weather forecast for the country, presented by Pivot BioProven 40. Predictable, productive, weatherproof. Turn to a better nitrogen. Turn to Pivot BioProven 40. Learn more at pivotbio.com. We'll look at his precipitation map to see if there's anything meaningful there. Any moisture amounts could really make a difference. Greg, what do you see now?
In spots, in scattered areas, it's kind of more or less a typical July precipitation pattern here for the mid to late stretch of the month. Problem is we're kind of in a hole, obviously, into these central Corn Belt locales, and I don't think we're going to make any significant makeup going forward from about the Missouri on westward. You can forget about it rest of the summer, central and southern areas of the plains. Now, the monsoon season is into play, and there's a tropical system that may feed some tropical moisture into areas of the desert southwest. It's all or nothing there, and the lightning issues as well has been certainly spiking some additional fires. Yosemite, for example, that's a tough situation. Spotty at best Pacific Northwest. There may be an area of fair to good coverage showers and thunderstorms out of the northwestern Corn Belt to the Ohio Valley. 1 or 2 scattered storms here. Otherwise, the bulk of the moisture for the week, Max, on a little bit of a tropical system out of the eastern Gulf and making its way up the Appalachian Trail as the week wears on. on.
For the week of July 25th, there's a lot of the corn crop that's going to be in pollination. How do you see the heat and the precip?
Well, here is the heat for you, and it's centered right here across the Corn Palace Empire region. Up probably around 100 degrees, probably low to mid 90s, pretty common in the eastern and southern Corn Belt. Forget about it here into the southern plains, just too hot for anything. A bit below average over the southeast and the western states. The southeast drop in temperatures because of maybe a little tropical system here. Wet in this part of the country, down through central and south Texas. Another tropical draw of moisture, well below average moisture here for much of the heartland. A little sliver of above average moisture and rain in the Pacific Northwest.
The heat can be tough on fairs. We're in the fair season. Let's look at that first week of August.
Probably some long lines at your favorite beverage stand here, running over the western Corn Belt, northern and central plains. The heat back into northern California. Tropical cloudiness and moisture keeps temperatures at bay. Gulf Coast a little above into the eastern Corn Belt, a little below into the northeast to New England. And from a moisture standpoint, these ring of fire ridge riding thunderstorms, downpours, but severe potential upper Midwest into the eastern Corn Belt. Wet over the southeast. Here's this tropical pattern out of the Atlantic. Wet through Texas, good news, and over the southwestern part of the country too.
Boy, that's severe. We'll have some people uptight when you talk about severe weather this stage of the crop development, recalling
yes,
August 10th 2 years ago and a derecho.
That's right. We've already had a couple of those occurrences, and it's the right setup. You get these systems under the jet stream and off you go. A little bit of a breakdown to the hot ridge, some troughing over the middle part of the country. The warmth here, a drop off into the northwestern sections, and this is relatively good news, but again, comes at a price. Severe weather potential northern and central plains, but there's drought relief of the forecast. We've got to get almost to early to mid-August. Those late beans will appreciate it. Into the Great Lakes region below for the eastern part of the country. Busy tropical season will get underway over the southeastern part of the country, and the wet weather too extends into the northwest.
Next on This Week in Agribusiness, it's Max's Tractor Shed, spotlighting another great American tractor.
There was a time when the lawmen would put out an all-points bulletin, an APB they called it, for a wanted individual. This week it's a wanted tractor. They're trying to track it down in eastern Nebraska. Max's Tractor Shed is brought to you by Store-Lock Tool Cabinets. You'll find what you need, I bet you, when you take a look at the various configurations and colors at StoreLock.com. Well, in eastern Nebraska, right there at Elkhorn, right on the cusp of Omaha's expansion, Mickey Gotch has his John Deere tractors. He has several that he uses there on the farm, and he has some that he's very proud of from back in the day. Take a look at this nicely restored John Deere, this 620. Those were only made about 3 years, 1956 to 1958. There were only about 20,000 of them made. But the tractor Mickey thinks about a lot is one you don't see in his shed. It got away from the family more than 30 years ago. Mickey Gotch would love to get it back, that John Deere 730 diesel. This is the photo taken the evening before the tractor left the farm. It had a narrow front end. It had a Murphy start switch on it. A John Deere 730, very much wanted in eastern Nebraska by Mickey Gotch. Well, let's find out what's selling in the week ahead at Big Iron Auctions.
Well, Max, the used equipment market is so hot. This past week, a 1990 John Deere 4555 two-wheel drive combine sells in Sedgwick, Kansas for a record $67,750. We have a great lineup of equipment selling on July the 20th, several retirement sales, including the Leon Hiltner retirement sale in Wales, North Dakota, featuring a Case IH Magnum 340 mechanical front tractor with 2,516 hours. Also selling a 2010 Massey Ferguson 9220 windrower with just over 1,000 hours, plus a 1987 Kenworth W900 semi-truck tractor. Speaking of trucks, PTL Trucking Inc., they are retiring by Atkinson, Nebraska. They have some late model Jet tri-axle side dump trailers and a 2010 Wilson DWH 550 tri-axle grain trailer. And if you want to have some fun this summer, Max, the Stephen Houghton Senior Estate Sale features a 1978 Ebco motorboat and a 1976 Harley-Davidson motorcycle. All of this equipment sells on July the 20th on the BigIron.com auction.
We see new leaders in agriculture be developed every day, and FFA is a key part of that. Joining us this week is Isaiah Pruitt. Just completed his term as the Kentucky FFA state reporter. Isaiah, thanks for joining us.
Thank you all for having me.
What was it this past year, Isaiah, while you were serving, that was the highlight of your year of service to FFA?
I would have to say after, a couple of years of pandemic kind of clouding a lot of FFA events, a lot of FFA activities in students' minds, being able to get back in the classroom, get back doing in-person FFA events, and then wrapping up a fully in-person state convention where we had over 85% of students that experienced their first in-person state convention at the home of the Kentucky Wildcats in Rupp Arena.
That is fantastic. And while you were at convention, Isaiah, as the reporter, what were your duties?
Yeah. So myself and our Sentinel, Tristan Burks, both performed the convention welcome. In the first session at the beginning, before any of the convention began, well, we hyped the crowd up. We got them ready to go with our theme and with the activities in the week ahead, and also served in a role that was in presenting students with their awards, seeing the excitement and celebrating with them as they won their respective contests they prepared so hard for.
Isaiah, think back, and what was it that prompted you to join FFA in the first place?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In the beginning, it really was a passion to get involved in high school. I never was the kid to really be the most popular one in the crowd, but I found FFA and I found a passion in leading others and in finding service in others and serving my community. And I've seen that in FFA and seeing how agriculture was such and high stakes in our community. And I really found a calling to be involved in FFA and to be involved in agriculture.
That's fantastic, Isaiah. We wish you the best as your future moves forward. Thanks for joining us here.
Thank you all for having me.
Well, folks, summer is moving along. July is halfway through, which means we're almost to the month of August, Max, which means we are getting very, very close to that Farm Progress Show in Boone.
Just a little more than 40 days and 40 nights, Mike, until the 2022 Farm Progress Show. And Dina Morgan is joining us here to talk about it as we're in that final home stretch toward the show this year. Dina, is everything falling into place?
It is falling into place. We get to this middle part of July, and it's just a downhill slide till we get to the show at the end of August.
I saw the release the other day that Lee Bryce will be back. He will be appearing just as he did at the 2021 show in Decatur, Illinois.
Yes, we are so excited to have him back. That was, I think, a highlight of 2021 was the Lee Bryce concert. And so we're very pleased to have him back here in Boone for this year's show. So that will be Wednesday evening, August 31st. The opening act will take the stage about 5:30 with Lee following. And it's sponsored by Case IH. It was a great show last year. So come on out. It's included with your admission into the Farm Progress Show, so no additional fee. So once you come to the show all day, walk around, and then stay for the concert that evening.
I noticed on the show map, I was on the site the other day, on the online site, and you could see there's an area blocked out for the concert. It's right there nearby. It's just a part of the grounds, isn't it?
Correct. So that concert will be on the grounds in the southeast corner. So once you get to the show, it will be easy to find.
What's new at the show this year? There's always an upgrade of facilities, it seems, every year.
Yes, this year we are so excited to have a partnership with the Iowa Soybean Association and Iowa State University, where they have developed an asphalt product that uses a soy polymer to bind everything together. And that will now be the surface for our VIT, our Varied Industries tents. So before, that's always been on grass, which means it can be a little uneven. It can get a little wet if we do have some rain. And this will be a considerable upgrade from what we have had in the past. Just making it completely level, easier to walk on, and certainly easier for our exhibitors to set up. So we're very pleased to be able to have that this year.
Well, how cool is that? I heard it was asphalt. I didn't hear the soybean component was there.
Yes. So the Iowa State has been working on this product, and they partnered with the Iowa Soybean Association. And I just heard the gentleman say the other day they've done about 30 projects in 10 states. So I think you're going to be hearing more and more about it. And we're so happy to have it here at the Farm Progress Show, not only for the show, but it'll be a great improvement for this facility for events that they have beyond just the Farm Progress Show.
I know while we have this series running on RFD TV called Farm Next, that Pivot Bio will have a special Farm Next display at this year's Farm Progress Show.
Correct. So right next to the Pivot Bio display will be all of our Farm Next participants. So if you want to come and learn more about their product or talk to that founder, it's a great opportunity to do that. And they'll also be able to vote on site. So I think you can do it online as well, but you can vote when you come to the show too. So if that has really piqued your interest and you want to learn more about those products and about those inventions, I think that's a great place to stop by and actually talk to the founders.
Not only are the inventions neat, but as I found as we recorded those shows in recent weeks, those are great people. They're just interesting people. They're personable individuals and they have varied backgrounds, but it's nice to visit with them, and I'm sure folks attending the show will enjoy that too. We will see you just a few days, Dina.
Yes, it will be the end of August before we know it.
Dana Morgan joining us from the Farm Progress Show site at Boone, Iowa. Coming up, it'll be the 30th and 31st of August, Mike, and September 1st.
Well, thank you, Max. It is hard to believe it's getting to be here that quickly. FarmProgressShow.com. Get on there and get those tickets purchased.
You can go to the website and map your show. Decide where you want to go in advance. I would advise you folks, you'll catch Mike Pearson there somewhere. You can get an autograph from Mike Pearson. We'll see you next weekend here. Have a great week.
Closed captioning for This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Kubota. Shape your world. This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Case IH. This Week in Agribusiness is produced by OMAX Communications in association with 22 Creative Group. We invite you to visit us online at agbizweek.com.